Attorney-Client Connection, where we help bridge the gap between attorneys and clients to help increase case success. I'm your host, Edith Nazarian. I practice criminal and immigration law in Los Angeles, California, and today we will be talking about defending clients in high-stakes situations. To help me do this, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing my good friend, Joe Trigilio. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hi, Edith. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. A little bit about Joe. Joe Trigilio is the executive director of Loyola's Project for the Innocent, LPI, an innocence project dedicated to serving Los Angeles and its surrounding counties. Before joining LPI, Joe was a supervising deputy federal public defender for the Central District of California in its capital habeas unit, where he spent 15 years representing men and women sentenced to death in their federal and state post-conviction proceedings. Joe teaches courses on wrongful convictions and habeas litigation at Loyola and Southwestern law schools. He began his career as a staff attorney at the Habeas Corpus Resource Center, where he represented death-sentenced inmates in their state post-conviction proceedings. Okay, so Joe, we have a lot to talk about today. You and I go way back to when I was in Loyola and I was in LPI. I was at Loyola's Project for the Innocent, which was such an amazing experience. And it was so lovely working with you and everyone else at the clinic. And it was so eye-opening for me at just how much injustice can happen, but also that we can right those wrongs, right? And that really was empowering. And as a law student, for me, that was so pivotal to be able to work at the clinic with you and everyone else and just do as much good as possible, right?
Right. And I can say, working with you, I have such fond memories, and working with all of our students. I was an adjunct at the time and now
Yeah.
in full time. And I can say, like, you guys, students have taught me so much and have helped me be a better lawyer and do this work more effectively and do it for the long term. And I wouldn't be here without working with you guys. So I'm really grateful to have had the chance.
Oh, that's so amazing. Thank you for saying that because having those experiences, I think, also shaped me as an attorney today doing criminal and immigration work. I wanted to ask you, Joe, what made you get into habeas work? I mean, what is habeas? Let's start with that. What is habeas?
Sure, it's a good question. There's some headlines of our own government officials don't know what it means. Habeas corpus is essentially the tool that allows us to help folks who are detained against the law get out of prison. It's historically it's the last most important check on the government, on the executive, and their power to detain people, to deprive people of liberty. A little more nuanced for the lawyers. It's a collateral attack on a conviction, unlike an appeal that's sort of linear and focused on sort of what errors happened at trial. Habeas corpus litigation comes at it from the outside, looks at stuff the jury didn't get to hear for whatever reason, and is more rooted in equity and as opposed to sort of legalese, and said what actually happened here, and is this person actually in custody wrongfully or justifiably. It's a
Yeah.
fascinating area of the law. I love it. It never gets old. I'm learning something new, constantly feeling behind the eight ball, which is great as a lawyer. And so it's an awesome area to practice, in addition to rewarding with what we can do.
Yeah, and I'm really curious how you got into this type of work. What made you decide, okay, you know what? I'm gonna do habeas work and work with do some really tough cases.
Yeah, people would think, especially when you get into federal habeas, people think you're crazy for wanting to do this type of work. It's very niche, but I didn't come at it from even knowing what habeas was. I grew up with no lawyers in my family. Really, what led me to want to do post conviction work was growing up in Texas. Frankly, I grew up in San Antonio. The death penalty was all around me. I'd hear of executions happening. When I was growing up, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays is when they happened. Almost every week, it seemed like. And I would just put together vigils to sort of think about these people, just say, hey, someone's got to think about them. I eventually would do organized marches in San Antonio to city council, to do a resolution to sort of spotlight issues around the death penalty. They were executing juvenile offenders when I was in college and in high school. I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I got into lobbying very ineffectively, laughed out of the room. And I started working with groups like Murder Victims Family for Reconciliation, meeting families of victims of violent crime, and also working with folks who are on death row. The first person whose case I was able to sort of work with at an activist level is Napoleon Beasley. I think he was 16 at the time of his conviction, and just seeing how everybody treated these folks who were on death row as just non-human, hated the vitriol I got from trying to just say these folks have some dignity, they're human beings, we should think about that. The vitriol I got, the vitriol that was so palpable, was really repugnant to me, on a lot of different levels, and that really is what led me to go to law school and want to
Mhm.
represent these folks full time. So it's, I'm very strange in that I've had a one track mind. I went to law school to represent folks on death row,
Yeah.
graduated and did that work. It's kind of that's sort of been my lane, and I haven't
Yeah.
looked back.
That's amazing. I love that you had that passion. So, would you say that that is a continuing driving force for you? I mean, I'm curious to hear because we hear it in the news, habeas, and people are trying to attack it. How important do you think habeas work is then, based on everything that you have experienced?
I mean, I'm now at the Innocence Project and no longer doing capital work exclusively. So I have recognized that injustice extends beyond capital cases. And
Mm-hmm.
ironically, folks who aren't on death row, it's even more scary because they don't have a right to a lawyer. They have nobody to help them get out. And you talk about the importance of habeas. As it exists now, there's no right to counsel in a habeas proceeding. These folks who are incarcerated are just left doing it on their own. But at least there is a small door open to them to check their detention. Uh,
Yeah.
that is it. I mean, that is it. The reason why it's baked, it's the only criminal right that's not in the Bill of Rights, but in the actual Constitution, because it's so critical to ensure that folks can't just be arbitrarily detained.
Yeah.
It's the only check. And to
Yeah.
have that door, even if it's a sliver somewhat opened, it's kind of all we have as a free society. When that door closes and the government is emboldened and empowered to just lock people up without due process, without worrying about if they can be checked later down the road, that's kind of it. We are now in a different society, in a different
Yeah.
place, and
Yeah.
it's really scary to see arguments being made that that door should be closed. Never seen that happen, even in situations where the habeas corpus was suspended. It was a congressional act, as wrong as it was. But to see the executive say we can do this unilaterally is pretty terrifying. So it's more important that we all kind of recognize what habeas is, why it's important to have some check on the power of the government to do what we've given them the power to do.
Yeah. No, I could not agree more. Practicing immigration law and knowing that, people can be detained, and just having the peace of mind of thinking, okay, if necessary, we can bring a habeas case about an unlawful detention. I mean, at the very least, I feel that if we have that, it's one way of protecting people's rights, right? And to
Yeah.
not have that is really very scary. So I'm completely on board with you on that. When you look at a habeas case, I'm curious, capital case, habeas case, any sort of high stakes case, what is your analysis of it? How do you go about approaching it, analyzing it, presenting it? I know those are all different things, but how do you look at a case when you first get it?
Yeah, it's a good question because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it as I've tried to teach it and
Mhm.
train other lawyers to do it. Really, at its core, it's storytelling. I mean, that's the role of any lawyer, right? But I think in our job as lawyers generally is to be storytellers. But in habeas corpus, I think it's more crystallized and more at the forefront even than other areas, even like trial advocacy, because what we're doing is in the way I approach a habeas case or a post conviction case is I'm looking at what the jury heard as a narrative, as a story, and
Uh-huh.
I wish I had a screen. I literally go through the plot structure of the prosecution's case, the rising action, the falling action, the climax, the new steady state, all of that elements of the
Mhm.
prosecution's story, and consciously think about it, and then attempt to deconstruct it. What elements went into that story? What was the setting? What was the cast? What was the rising action in the case, which is usually the crime? What was the police investigation? Where was the climax of the story? Usually what the jury heard. And what's in their new steady state is our client's convicted. And then I
Mhm.
go about the work of, okay, we have to craft a different story. And our job in habeas is to tell a different picture, to create, frame a different picture than what the jury heard. Uh,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
why the jury didn't hear it is the legal claims, but
Mhm.
what the jury didn't hear is our news story.
Yeah.
So we focus on what's our new cast. We create a cast list. What is the timeline of the police investigation so that we can start to create a new setting and a new framing of our our story isn't going to start with the crime. It's going to start with
Yeah.
the police hiding evidence or
Yeah.
showing the witness a circled photo, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we need a chronology for that, an investigation plan of how to develop those new facts and new evidence, and ultimately sort of using our legal brains again for how we're going to, what legal vehicle are we going to use? What claims are we going to raise? Are we going to file a habeas
Yeah.
petition? Are we going to go to the DA's post conviction justice unit? Whatever it is, how are we going to package this to our audience? And knowing our audience, as you know, is critical to a story,
Yes.
right? Who is
Yeah.
our audience? Is it Nathan Hochman, who just got elected as DA? He might have a different set of interests than the California Supreme Court or a superior court. So knowing your audience is also really critical.
Yeah. I love, Joe, that you say you put it in the frame of a story. As an English major, so I was an
Ah,
English
you are an
major.
English major. That's
Yeah.
you get it. That's great. My parents were high school English teachers, so they taught me all those
Oh my
things.
god! Oh my god! Okay, I love that. I love that connection because yeah, as an English major, and going over stories and just reading so many different stories, but really it comes down to stories in a way because we're all humans, right? We are all living a story ourselves, and when you've said, who know your audience, I think that's so critical. Exactly, who is your audience? And what is the type of story that they are willing to hear, right? Or how are we packaging this story to this person? Because when we think of a case, ultimately we're looking at, okay, what is it about, but then also what is our end goal? What do we
Mm-hmm.
want to accomplish with this? And how we package things is very important as attorneys. And how we present evidence is also very crucial. What kind of evidence do we present? When I get a removal case, for example, where maybe there are some facts or there's some history where it's, not so palatable. It's not, a clean, squeaky clean case where I can just say, oh, okay, we don't need to worry about it. It's just, okay, we just present the case and it should be good to go. No, when we have things like criminal histories, well, when did the crimes happen? Okay, who's the person now versus who were they back then? And then what is going on in their lives right now? Maybe there are health issues, or maybe there's, hardship questions. And we need to present, I think, our case in the best light possible, in the strongest light, and knowing, in habeas, right? The jury heard one story, right? Now we're going to be telling a story that they didn't hear
Right.
about, for example, police misconduct or prosecutorial misconduct, right? I mean, this is what they didn't see. So now we take that and then we present it at the forefront, right? What is our claim, and how are we? So I think I completely agree. How we package our
Yeah.
story and our evidence is so crucial.
And I'm glad you talked about sort of dealing with maybe some bad facts,
Yeah.
because that's such an important. I mean, obviously, any criminal defense lawyer would tell you you're going to be encountered with bad facts.
Yeah.
Whether or not your client is innocent is immaterial. You're going to have bad hard evidence that you can't get around. So
Yeah.
my mantra is always embrace the bad facts.
Yeah.
Embrace the bad facts. Make them your own. Don't try to hide them. Don't try to minimize them. Embrace them and package them into your story, and that's the trick. Um,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
trial, at the trial level, or in habeas, it's the same deal.
Yeah. No, I love that you say that because I feel like that is something that I really learned in the clinic as well when I was there, which is,
That's
yeah, you own it. You don't try to pretend that the crime didn't happen.
right, right.
It is there. So you own it, but you own it and you say, okay, it happened and still, right? We are
Yeah.
here. So yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. What types of evidence do you like using when it comes to sort of tricky kind of sticky situations? I know for me, I like to oftentimes bolster cases with expert testimony or psychological reports from professionals to kind of boost credibility, along with, I will say, I will use family photos to garner some sympathy as well if possible. It depends on, each case is different, but I try to gather as much beneficial evidence that I can, mitigating evidence and things that will put my client in the best light. I'd love to hear what you like to do.
Right. I mean, obviously, this is so dependent on the type of case that you're dealing
Yeah.
with, but generally, knowing our audience, and let's assume our audience is a judge, a court
Yeah.
reading a habeas petition, I think it's really number one. I don't know if there's a type of evidence, but number one, I always like to incorporate charts, graphs, pictures into my brief writing, into the petition itself,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to rely on her clerk or the judge to sift through my exhibits at the back of the brief. I want her to
Mm-hmm.
see the visuals right away. If it's context dependent, but make sure if there's a quick chart or picture of an exhibit, I'll screen clip it right in there, um, rather than in a boring way distinguishing two different cases. I'll just do a chart of each case fact and sort of lay it out that way so it's easier, because I want this judge writing the final chapter of my petition and I want her to read it. And so
Yeah.
I'll do so. That's number one. But in terms of how to synthesize complicated facts, yes, expert testimony is essential, especially in post conviction,
Uh-huh.
especially in complex, serious felony cases, where so often the prosecution is relying on a version of facts that has a lot of premises that are debunked. Eyewitness identification, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
reliability of eyewitness IDs. Juries judges often think juries can assess this out based on common sense. We now know there's a lot more to it, to memory science, that we
Yeah.
have to explain to a judge. Looking at mitigating evidence, right? Explaining, I think you're right on to have family photos. I'm shameless with all of that. But how do you explain to a privileged judge who may not have ever, been to a certain part of town, why our client got pushed into the gang lifestyle?
Yeah.
Not because they're just thirsty for violence, but because when someone has that amount of neglect in the home and is subject to a certain amount of trauma and abuse, they are going to be pushed into any family or support mechanism they can.
Yeah.
And that comes from a young age. But to explain that, I can't. My brief writing is not going to do it, right? I need an expert, and finding the right expert is important. So I've had Father Boyle as an expert, gang expert in my case, to
Uh-huh.
in a really heartfelt way, in beautiful prose, explain why my client started down this wrong road, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then combine that with more of an academic sort of scientific thing of what happens to the brain with trauma and how it sort of narrows the pathways and limits your options or makes you unable to regulate certain executive functioning. That all requires a different type of expert than Father Boyle.
Yeah.
Piecing it together, you get the heart and you get the mind that
Yeah.
jurors just don't get, because at the trial level, when judges are dealing with things like efficiency and court time, they often don't allow that type of evidence in. And so it's up to us to really educate the judge.
Yeah. I love what you just said, Joe, because I feel like what you said so perfectly was, how are we describing this and how do we make things click for people?
Right.
And that can be in different ways. So when you were mentioning the charts, somebody could be more visual, right? No, I love that, because that is such a great tip, because somebody might not get it just by reading it simply, but if they see it in a visual format, that will make them, okay, now I understand it better. And yeah, and I don't have to wait until I get to the exhibit, right, to
Yeah.
understand that. Um, and then also, I might not come from the same background as my client, or I might not have the same information, but I know somebody who can tell the story, and finding that person, the right person, to be able to explain it, and from a place of authority, right? So getting the evidence that we need in order to craft the correct, I would say, painting, right? To draw the correct painting for the person who's viewing it, and have them see the complete picture, right?
Exactly.
And we're kind of we're assembling it all, right? We're in charge of us. Okay, we're gonna put this piece over here and that piece over there, and this part looks great. It's like this collage, but then when you put it all together, here's our story, right? Here's
That's
our,
right. And it can't be too complicated. It can't look
yeah,
too messy. It can't be like, I
yeah.
don't know what the heck I'm looking at. It's got to be, yeah, it's got to look palatable to whoever's viewing it, right?
Yeah, yeah. What would you say out of, what's a case that really stands out to you where you feel like all these things that we're talking about really came through, and you feel like, okay, it all came together, and we got the result that we wanted.
Oh man, there's so many where we've had to, both with wins in my capital cases where we were able to ensure someone is not going to get executed, and also here at the project. I guess one case rings a bell. It's Jonathan. I won't say his last name. Jonathan. He was exonerated, and it's one where you hear the facts and you're like, what are we doing? What's the Innocence Project doing? He was
Uh-huh.
convicted of walking into his girlfriend's apartment and stabbing her. Got convicted of premeditated attempted murder. The jury heard that he was going through some sort of meltdown and calling his friends saying, I'm going to kill myself, and sort of breaking down. The jury heard that he goes straight to his girlfriend's house, pulls out a pocket knife, and starts swinging his
Oh my
knife
gosh.
at her. Traumatic, awful for her. She survived. She had very limited injuries. But what happened was she sort of pushed him off. And then once that happened, he's like snapped out of it, dropped his knife, ran straight out of her apartment into a nearby emergency room and turned himself in and said, I just did this terrible thing. Help me. And he was arrested, convicted, sentenced to life for this premeditated murder. The jury also heard that he had taken this antidepressant drug. He had been prescribed a couple months earlier, called Effexor, and the jury didn't believe. Like, okay, yeah, everyone takes that's the most widely prescribed drug. Doesn't matter. We get his case. I got appointed to his case at the federal defender's office, and I jointly, with the Innocence Project, we jointly represented him. um, I met with Jonathan, and we haven't talked about sort of client issues yet, and sort of
Yeah.
how you talk to a client about these type of cases. But um, it just struck me that this is completely crazy, that to think that he would do something like this. Just
Hmm.
and in the way he spoke of himself and of the what happened, it was like it was a different person. And so it
Hmm.
just, what's going on here? He raised a bunch of claims that were based on the record that weren't really getting at his innocence, like a Miranda claim by himself because he had no legal help. So he was just sort of regurgitating what his appellate lawyer raised, wasn't really getting into the issues of
Uh-huh.
why this might have happened to him. And so I just like, I honestly got on Google and, typed in effexor and violence. And
Uh-huh.
it turns out it's one of the only drugs with a black box warning of homicidal ideation as a
Oh
possible
my
side effect. Very
God.
rare.
Okay.
And there's this burgeoning science called pharmacogenetics that is getting at the link between how your genes metabolize drugs and the impact of the drugs on your brain. And there
Mm-hmm.
are studies on this particular drug. And when people have mutations or variants in this grouping of genes, the CY450 grouping of genes, it prevents them from metabolizing the drug appropriately. And it can essentially build up in the brain over time and cause psychosis or other side effects.
Wow.
So that was like, holy cow, that's a narrative change, right? That's a
Yeah.
different way to frame the case. But I have no idea if it's right or not. So
Yeah.
we're probably going on a tangent here, but I had to talk with the client about getting this DNA test. And
Oh,
once you
wow. Okay.
go down this route, it's possible the other side's going to learn about it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
what if you don't have this variant, right? If he didn't have the variant, and what I know he felt is like, well, this means I'm a murderer. Like if I don't have this genetic gene, then I did this thing. So it was really hard for him to decide whether to do this testing because what that could mean
Mm-hmm.
for him. But we ended up going through with it. Turns out he had 4 or 5 different variants in that grouping of genes,
Wow.
meaning he wasn't metabolizing that drug. It was building up slowly in his system over time. And on that basis, when we got that DNA report, we were able to frame that change narrative, and still honor the trauma that the victim went through. And he has deep remorse for what happened,
Yeah.
what he did, what his actions did. But we were able to explain that wasn't his brain, and he's maybe not innocent in the traditional sense, but he's
Mm-hmm.
certainly his mens rea and his mental state is certainly less culpable than a premeditated first degree murderer. And we were able to get him released from custody back in 2022, in part based on this new evidence that we heard. And that framing, I think, was obviously really critical to that.
Wow, that is so that's really amazing, Joe, that you were able to take that, hunch that you had,
Well, barely. I mean, barely a hunch, right? It's like getting on Google, which is,
Yeah.
shameless in that I will, randomly Google things.
Yeah, but it led you to unlock a piece of the, puzzle. And really it's about knowing your client, right? At the end of the day, it's about knowing your client.
Right.
And we as their attorneys, really it's on us to investigate everything that we can in order to understand the client, the case, all of that. And what you just explained is exactly that, which is I want to understand who this person is and what led this to happen. And with the DNA test, I mean, how unique is that?
I know. It's
How unique is that to have a client do, I've had people do, paternity tests to
I
show
know,
the
same.
connection, but not DNA tests to see if they, have this
Right.
mutation.
Well, it comes up a lot in like capital cases. It's a little more
Yeah.
tricky in capital. We get every capital client, they should have a neuropsychological examination, like really.
Yeah.
And that's going to look for, things like executive functioning impairments.
Hmm.
And I even had a guy, we had a false confession issue. Guy was saying he confessed falsely. It was his word
Yeah.
versus the 2 cops,
Yeah.
and he's going to lose every time based on just that. But we did
Yeah.
a neuropsychological examination of him, and it turns out he had some executive functioning impairments that caused him to not be able to process what the police officer was telling him and made him much more susceptible. But that kind of testing, which to your point is getting at a truth and finding out what's going on, but sometimes in a way that's going to be really troubling to the client. And so we
Hmm.
have to be really honest with our clients that look, this, he
Yeah.
doesn't want to. No one wants to walk around and say I'm impaired.
Yeah.
In our capital cases, no one wants to say, "Well, I'm just a victim of trauma and have no sort of agency."
Yeah.
And we're not saying that exactly, but it's a hard reality for them to comprehend that I am damaged, and
Hmm.
we have to navigate that with them with just I think, empathy and love and trust with them to establish that and get them willing to trust us to get into their most vulnerable aspects of who they are.
Yeah. I think you bring up such a great point of client and attorney trust, because essentially, especially in these types of high stakes situations, a lot is on the line for the client. They are scared. They are facing, so much is on the line for them.
Right.
Their livelihood, they may be incarcerated. And for years, and haven't been able to see or hug their loved ones, right?
Right.
I see a lot of cases where people just want to stay here and not be separated from their families and continue living, without being in fear and having some security. It's a lot. And so we really have, I feel like we are entrusted with their cases, with their lives. And it's so important that we build that relationship with them, that they feel comfortable with us in sharing their lives and in trusting, like what you said is, look, we're gonna there's this test that we can do, right? And
Yeah.
having them feel comfortable enough to say, I have some reservations, but I'm going to take your advice, right? I'd love to hear from you. What are some strategies that you take with clients, especially when there may be some hesitation, or how do you explain cases to clients and maybe odds to clients, and especially in these types of cases?
Yeah, it's hard because uniquely, in my type of cases in post conviction, they and very often they're justified to feel like they've been let down already by a number of lawyers that have led up to me being on their case. Necessarily, they've
Mhm.
lost at trial, they've lost their appeal, and they're
Yeah.
stuck in prison. And so they have, and if they're innocent, in my current role here, they've had an attorney let them down in some one way or another. Maybe not through the attorney's fault, but they feel let down certainly by the system. And so it's starting from a place of who the heck are you? You're just another lawyer coming in. Why should I trust you? And
Yeah.
I dealt with this very often when I was at the federal defenders being appointed on a new death penalty case. Guy's been in prison, for at least 10, 15 years, hasn't even had a lawyer appointed for 10 years. And then I come in and he's like, oh, you're another public defender. Right. So I think the strategy, I don't know if it's even a strategy. It's just, this is interacting with human beings. It's
Yeah.
number one, being very clear with who I am going into it. I am not the alpha male dude who's going to be like, "Hey, man, I'm your bro. I'm going to get you out. That's just not my personality. My personality
Hmm.
is like, we're going to follow the rules. I'm going to be the most ethical guy in the courtrooom, and you're going to know
Yeah.
it. And I'm
Yeah.
going to follow. I'm going to tell you not to get in trouble. Like, that's my
Yeah.
thing, and that's who I am. And so being authentic and not trying to play the role of the lawyer that you think they want. Um,
Hmm.
Takes some time to realize, really critical. And then number two, being vulnerable with them in a sense, like
Yeah.
this is a really big case. I want the best for you. I'm trying to figure out what that is. These cases are hard. It's an uphill battle. Many of them lose, but I'm going to do my best and I want to work with you and I'm going to care a lot about you. So being vulnerable and then imparting onto them, like, I am going to be straight with you. You're going to hear, I'm going to love telling you good news, but I'm going to tell you bad news. And I'm going to tell you when I think you're wrong or when I think the facts are really bad on this point.
Yeah.
And we need to get to a place where you can hear that and help me understand that and ask them sort of what is it that you want from me. And so it's
Hmm.
just that basic kind of ability to get rapport. And boundary setting is another thing that we can talk about there because it's very easy when you have that relationship to start oversharing and in
Hmm.
situations where you're setting both parties up to maybe get in a bad situation. And
Yeah.
that company work, it comes up shockingly more than I thought, where attorneys find themselves in these situations that are really tough. but so I don't overshare, but I do tell them about my life. I'm a huge
Yeah.
Prince fanatic. There's certain things about me that are a little weird, and I'll share some stuff about me because I'm going to be diving into their life pretty deep,
Yeah.
and I want us to have some sort of ability to connect outside of me looking at all the terrible things that have happened in this person's life.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
I
a
think
lot.
you bring up, yeah, I think you bring up such great points about how to treat a client, um, and how to care for a client, right? I think that if you genuinely care about someone, I think that becomes palpable to them. I think they can see when you're being genuine. And I love that you said, I'm myself. I'm not going
Right,
to be who they think I should be or who they want me to be. I'm going to be myself, and being your authentic self and connecting with someone on a human heart connection basis. I think that is the people you can tell when someone is being genuine or not. And when you're not being genuine, then how can you build a connection with someone? And I love that you said that you are vulnerable, within boundaries. You are vulnerable. You share your life with them so that they know, look, I am here for you, and this is an attorney client relationship, but I genuinely care about you.
right,
And I want you to know about me as well, because if we're going to have a connection, we need to understand each other. We need to know where we're coming from, right? And I do think that creates a basis of trust that's so critical in these types of high stakes cases, because when someone is afraid of what's about to happen to them, or they don't know, they're unsure, like you were saying, they've had attorneys before, they don't know who you are. And I think by being genuine, being honest, caring for them, honest, and I really like what you said about, if I think the facts are bad, I'm going to say it, right? And that's something that I always do with clients too, is I tell them, if I think there's an issue, I just tell them as it is. I don't try to sugarcoat it or try to make it seem like it's better than it is, or their chances are better. I tell them just very honestly, look, this is the law. This is what we need to prove. But I'll strategize with them. I'll say, okay, this is, the law. And obviously, right, we're going to be the most ethical attorneys in this situation, because that is so crucial in any case. We're going to be doing things properly, and to have the clients understand that, and then say, but let's think about your case, let's think about the strategy, what can we, this is the law, so what happened to you, can we, is there an angle that we can take, right?
right.
It's always about the
Reframing. Is there a way to
angle.
reframe things a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's so crucial, when we're dealing with clients, and having them get on board with us
Yeah.
as we take
And
on their
I will
case.
say a nice tip, a little tip that's a little bit more strategizing tip that I learned that's really effective is in this conversation is offering to do a few things for them. Give them some promises that you will keep, like
Uh-huh.
right away. So I'm going to send you this article on whatever we talked about, or I'm going to get you a book of stamps, or I'm going to send you this thing or do this thing that's small and easy,
Hmm.
and do those two or three or four things over the next 2-3 months of you first meeting that client. And that goes a long way.
Yeah.
So that when you get to the big things of, hey, you have to take this 50 to life deal to get out of a death sentence, but it means you're in prison for another 20 years. That's a hard thing to get a client to trust you on, if they
Yeah.
don't trust that you will do the little things for them. And so you need to build up, the writing them back. The little tiny
Hmm.
things are critical in these bigger cases, because they add
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Joe. I think just showing that you follow through, and that you are backing up what you say that you're going to do. I think that's a great point. You mentioned boundaries, and I wanted to get into that a little also, with just how do you care for yourself
Oh
when you
man.
have dealing with, you know, um, really hard cases, capital cases where so much is at stake. I mean, how do you care for your well-being during all of this, because you're still doing what you're doing. You're
Yeah, and
you're still
yeah,
doing.
and burnout is real, and there's going to be
Yeah.
cycles, and so it's not like it's been a easy ride for me the entire time. There's been some real gut punches that I've had a few times, and the way I get through it is knowing I'm in this work for the purpose of it, not
Mm-hmm.
because it's a legal job, not because it's definitely not because it's high paying, but I'm in it because I really the the value, the meaning I get from it, the joy I get from it is seeing the the humanity and the person in our client
Yeah.
beyond what they're convicted of, and the ego part of me forcing this system, a federal court, whatever is the Ninth Circuit, to stop and have to listen to this
Mm-hmm.
person who you guys just cannot stand and you don't want to deal with, and we're now showing up and telling this person's story. And I think that's a really just an awesome thing to be able to do. It's
Yeah.
just fun and it's joyful, and I love that. And when we lose, if I can at least tell that person's story, that person has some benefit added. Um, but that doesn't mean that having to tell someone they lost in my situation is gutting. It means they're going to spend their lives in prison, perhaps. And the way you cope with that after a period of time of just going through anger, you go through is being honest with what my emotions are. I'm feeling really angry right now.
Yeah.
I'm feeling
Yeah.
really jaded, cynical. I'm feeling like, why am I doing this right now? But I'm also understanding those thoughts aren't truly me, and those
Yeah.
thoughts are transient, and really thinking about them, separating those emotions from my core, and processing them in that way helps sort of manage that fleeting emotion, because we can bring value and we can make a change as attorneys in these types of
Yes.
cases. I mean, you are doing work that's much more legally difficult than what I'm doing, and in the immigration sphere. I mean, the rules are so stacked against you and your clients, that I can see feeling like jaded and cynical. But the value you're giving these human beings by just being there for them and being the person there to navigate the system, in and of itself, is an end, that I think is sustainable. And then there's obviously, you need a family and an outlet and friends to talk to about this stuff, so that you can process the anger and just crapping
Yeah.
on the prosecutor or judge to somebody, even though you'll feel differently in maybe a month or two, maybe not.
Yeah.
But having that space to talk openly with folks, your community, is so important.
Yeah. No, thank you, Joe. Thank you for everything that you said. And I think what you said is so true about just having outlets and the fulfillment that, we get in doing what we do and making a difference in people's lives. I think that's what really drives me in what I do. Being able to say, okay, I did everything in my power, I did the best that I could to represent this person, right? And when it works out, and for example, they get the green card or they're able to
Yeah,
stay, I mean, it's such an amazing feeling to get, of just fighting for justice, doing what we can to make a difference in people's lives, but also in the system, that we're in. And I'm so honored to have you here and to have this conversation. Honestly, I think you're an amazing attorney, amazing teacher. I'm
oh,
so
thank you.
thankful that we worked together way back when, when I was in law school, and still now, we're able to have these conversations. I think it's amazing, and that I hope it inspires more people to get into the work that we do. I think that would be really, really great. And reaching out to mentors and things like that. Joe, if people wanted to reach out to you, how would they best contact you? What would be the best way to do that?
Well, you can. I am on Twitter, I guess. Yeah, I am on Twitter. Joseph Trigilio. You can just search my name, joseph.trigilio at lls.edu. But I would recommend folks, if you're at all interested in this type of work, go to our website, Project for the Innocent, at Loyola Law School. If you just Google Project for the Innocent Loyola, it'll come right up, and you'll have my contact information, more about our clinic, more about the work we do. We get volunteer attorneys all the time to assist us. We work with firms, larger firms on cases. So we do rely on the community for help and support. And so that's always valued, and I'm very grateful for it. I had a contract attorney contact me because he wanted to help out in his retirement and help me with this argument I was making about a plea agreement, right, with contract law. So regardless of what type of law you do or you practice, we could use your support.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you so much again for coming on and speaking with me on this, Joe.
Thank
It's
you for
always a
having me. It's a real
pleasure.
honor to be here. This is great. It's so good to talk with you again.
Yeah. And to everyone listening, if you enjoyed what you heard, please feel free to like, subscribe, and share. And if you have any suggestions for future content or episodes, contact us at podcast@enlawoffices.com. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.